Now, this week, the first 12 to 15-year-olds will be getting the COVID vaccine in schools. The move is controversial, not least because teens won't require parental consent to get the jab. Joining me now is Conservative MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge, Miriam Cates, who this morning has been debating the rollout in Westminster. Miriam, thanks for coming in to join us. We didn't have a memo, did we, on the clothing?
Yes, good colour choice.
So, Miriam, 12, 15-year-olds can now be jabbed if they choose to do so. Most people would think that's a good thing.
Well, there are clearly some marginal health benefits to children. That was the JCVI's advice. But those marginal benefits are based on the known risks of the vaccine. And their concern was about the unknown potential long-term risks of the vaccine. And of course, when you're talking about children who have their whole lives ahead of them, we do need to take those concerns seriously. So there have been some good points being made about educational disruption. But I think, firstly, it's unclear that vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds will stop educational disruption. And I also think we need to ask wider questions about, as you said, why are we rushing into this decision? What's the urgency?
And I know you said in your speech that you were surprised that the government seemed to put political pressure on the JCVI to reach a decision quickly about the vaccination of children.
Yes, and in the weeks running up to the recommendation, we had the former Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, calling publicly for them to get on with making that decision. And I think from a scientific point of view, we have to ask why that is. When the vaccination programme, the rollout has been so successful in adults, when we've so dramatically reduced the number of deaths and serious illnesses, and we know that children themselves aren't at risk. And then I think the other point to make on that is that throughout this process, the government has rigidly defended the JCVI's advice, the way they've made their decisions based on the individual medical benefits of the people being vaccinated. So why are we departing from that when it comes to children? And is it not just indicative of a fairly harmful way that we've treated children over the last 18 months?
But one of the reasons you point out it is harmful is because they've missed so much of school. Now, nobody wants them to miss any more school, but also, I think, you know, nobody will guarantee that Christmas is going to be a normal Christmas. Nobody wants Christmas like last year either. So there is an argument that if we're cautious, or if we roll out the jab to children, we might be able to return to normality quicker. We might be able to save Christmas. We might ensure that they're all in school. What do you say to people who make that point?
Well, that is obviously the hope, but even the Chief Medical Officer has said that a vaccination programme in and of itself is not going to be enough to end educational disruption. And I think where we are now is that disruption to education is a political choice. It's not a medical inevitability. Children are not at risk from COVID. Teachers are at no more risk than anybody else. Teachers have been jabbed. We know that schools aren't hotbeds of transmission. All the evidence shows that. So there is actually no medical or scientific reason now where there should be any disruption in schools. So vaccine or no vaccine, that has to come to an end. And I think one of the things that is driving the restrictions in school and the fear of restrictions is this mass testing programme, where we're testing millions of asymptomatic children twice a week. Why? The Health Secretary has said that case numbers are no longer important. Why are we testing healthy children? Doesn't it just drive up absence rates?
Do you think that might come to an end? Do you get any sense from your party, the government, the executive in your party, that they might stop that twice-a-week testing?
Well, it's certainly under review, I think, at the end of this month. But I don't have any steer, although I very much hope that many of us on the backbenches who have made that point, that our views have been heard.
So, I mean, Professor Finn from the JCVI said, the decision on whether to vaccinate 12 to 15-year-olds is not black and white, so echoing what you said, adding that while it's not essential for them to have a coronavirus, it is also perfectly sensible for them to do so. That's quite a lot for a parent to take in, I thought, when I read that.
Exactly, and I think that's what we need to be very clear about now. This is a very nuanced decision. They're very finely balanced risks, and it's perfectly acceptable, it's perfectly reasonable for a parent to choose to have their child vaccinated. It's perfectly reasonable for them to choose not to have their child vaccinated. And actually, we need to move forward, respecting those decisions and not being judgmental about other people's health decisions, which I think has been a big problem over the last 18 months. And just to be calm and reasonable about it and not to discriminate against anyone based on their personal health choice.
And yes, and you've made that point too, that you don't want to see children treated differently depending on whether or not they've been vaccinated. What do you mean by that in practice?
Well, I've seen a number of incidences across the country of children who are right now being discriminated against in schools because they aren't wearing a mask, often for exemptions, or they're choosing not to get tested. And I think that's really shocking, actually, because these are children and their education and their welfare should come first. And so whilst I appreciate ministers' reassurances that children won't be treated differently, how that works out in practice when schools will know the vaccination status of children, because it's happening in schools, how that works out in practice is very difficult to say, and we need some strong steer on that. And I think on that, the travel rules also need looking at, because it's still the case that a child aged 12 to 16 will have to be vaccinated in order to be exempt from the testing. That's going to weigh on parents' minds as they make these decisions, and perhaps make them to rush into it when otherwise they wouldn't. So we need to be very clear and transparent about all these things, but in a calm and non-judgmental way.
You're making your point very eloquently that children should not be effectively discriminated against when it comes to taking foreign holidays. Do you think the government are hearing the points that you make, or are you in a minority in your party?
I'm sure they're hearing it. I don't know whether I'm in a minority. I think, there is a general move across hopefully all politicians that we want to return to normal. How we do that is obviously up for debate. But somebody in the debate that I led this morning that you spoke about made the point, what is success? What does success look like here? And my view is we've got COVID down to the point where the vast majority of us are protected. I think in August, more people died from flu than COVID. That was even in August. So actually, what is our objective now? What is the objective in vaccinating children and continuing to mass test? And should we not just be monitoring serious illness, hospitalisation and death?
They're going up. Not in children, but they are going up.
Yes,
in
sure,
the population.
and we need to watch this carefully. But from a children's point of view, there isn't any reason I can see that we need to rush into this decision.
And just looking at what Adam Finn from the JCVI said at the weekend, he warned of possible aggression between parents who wanted their kids vaccinated and those who did not. Really? Can you imagine parents falling out over, whether Johnny over there's had his vaccine and, Ruth has had her vaccine?
Unfortunately, I can, and I think I know from schools again across the country that throughout the pandemic there have been arguments like this from parents who desperately don't want their children to wear masks in schools, parents who desperately do, and sadly schools are often caught in the middle of this, and that's why we need a strong steer from ministers laying down rules that apply to all schools across the country, because we can't put heads in a position where they're essentially making public health decisions. That's not what they're there to do. They're there to make educational decisions, and we need to lift the burden of those public health decisions and the judgment that they experience from them and make a very clear political steer in that direction.
Now, in Parliament this afternoon, Labour are they're having a debate. They've called for a debate, and it's their time on a Wednesday afternoon, so they get to decide the subject of the debate. And they're going to be debating the cost of living. I mean, Labour are onto something here, aren't they? Universal credit cut, national insurance rise, energy bills up. It sounds like the opposite of levelling up.
Well, the cost of living is certainly a concern, and we are seeing prices rise. There are numerous examples of that in the news, and as you said, we've been debating universal credit and a rise to national insurance. And these are very worrying times, it's absolutely true. And we do need a welfare state that is a genuine fallback for people, that does pay enough, but we also got to look at how we pay for it. And for example, the £20 a week universal credit uplift, if we keep that, that's £6 billion a year. Now, if we're prepared to do that, how do we pay for that? We can't borrow. And I think my position on that, in terms of I'm very concerned about families, is if we are going to increase the welfare budget, it needs to be targeted. And the £20 a week is for every universal credit claimant. If we were going to keep it, wouldn't it be better to target it at those with children, for example? And then, of course, we've got to tie that into the wider issue of pension age benefits. And I think, we do need a discussion about this, absolutely true. But wages are also rising, and that is a good thing. So we need to take that into account as well. There are some good news stories out there about employment and people earning more for the jobs that they do.
So I was tweeting a picture. Well, we took a selfie, didn't we, of you and my next and my next guest, Andrew Gwynn. And I was preparing to tweet it and tag you in, you're not on Twitter.
I'm not on Twitter.
Are you sensible or deranged?
Quite possibly both. No, I'm not on Twitter. I was briefly, but I just found the level of toxicity and abuse, quite frankly, on it unacceptable. And I think I don't need Twitter to communicate with my constituents.
No.
You know, I'm available on email, my website, phone, and I'm out and about in the community. And actually, if I'm not in the room, I can't be shouted at. That was my thing. And I just think Twitter isn't a healthy place. We're not meant to communicate in 200 and whatever it is characters. We're not meant to communicate outside of relationship. And I think that's what leads people down this rabbit hole of being nasty in a way that they never would face to face. You know, I do occasionally think about it, but at the moment, I'm quite happy not being part of the storm.
Yeah, it makes you very rare. And it's been lovely to chat to you today. And please do come back on GB News and join us again. And we might do a clothing chat before.
Yeah.
We come on. Thank you, Miriam.